Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how to draw a wolf in charcoal. And I've done drawings of wolves before, but in this one I think you can really see the shape of the whole body. So let's see how it was done. I'm going to do the sketch with a graphite pencil first, and then I'll switch to charcoal pencils. You could also do the sketch with some willow charcoal, but I prefer the graphite pencil. I'm going to use Master Touch woodless charcoal pencils, and I'm going to use some blending tools, tortillons and brushes. And I'm also going to need some erasers. I'm going to use a kneaded eraser and a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Now the paper I'm working on is a Fabriano sketching paper, about 5 × 8 inches in size. So this is going to be a slightly smaller drawing, but I picked this reference because you can see the whole body, because in a couple of previous drawings I've done of wolves that you can see on my channel, and I'm going to put those in the end screen so that you can check those out as well. I just made it a little bit thicker here. I'm going to shave off a little bit because I don't want the animal to appear too robust. Although I think most of it is just fur, and once I shade it, it's going to start to look better. So, as I was saying, a couple of my previous drawings that you can find here on my channel mostly focused on the head. And now I wanted to do one where you can see the whole body. So I'm going to start working with a charcoal pencil. And one of the things I like about these pencils is that you can sharpen them to a pretty fine tip, which allows you to draw even some smaller details, like here the ears, the eyes, and the nose and things like that. So I normally use 2 grades, the medium and soft. I do most of the work with a medium charcoal pencil. They pretty much feel the same, both of them, but the soft one is just a little bit darker and a little bit easier to blend. It's a little bit easier to move that material. Anyway, I'm working on the head right now, and I'm mostly focusing on putting in some of these darker areas. But because this is a smaller drawing, some of the details may be a little bit off at first, so it's going to take a little bit of time for me to get the shape of the head and some of the smaller details within the head to get them to look right, and I'll probably go back and revisit those every now and then during the drawing process. But like I said, right now I want to put in these darker areas, mostly these patches of darker fur on the top of the head, on the top of the snout, and the top of the neck and the back area. Because when you look at the wolf's fur, it mostly appears either grey or dark grey, depending on the lighting and depending on the wolf. But it's just basically a combination of black and white hairs, where in some parts of the body, in some parts of that fur coat, there's more black hair, and in others there's more white hair. And I want to put in those darker ones first, and I'm going to refine their texture and the appearance of the fur a bit later, and I'm going to do that with erasers. Right now I'm doing a little bit of refining with a tortillon, where I'm both blending and softening some of these marks. But a good thing about tortillons is that you can also use them as a drawing tool, not just as a blending tool. Because when they pick up a little bit of charcoal, you can draw with them, like I'm doing now. You can draw some lighter marks with them. Marks that are not as dark or as clean as if you used a charcoal pencil. Which you can use to your advantage, because sometimes you don't want very clean edges. Sometimes you want slightly softer marks, lighter marks, and that can be useful when drawing fur. Here I'm using the Tombow Mono Zero eraser to clean up some of the lighter details, as I'm kind of struggling with the shape of the eye here. But like I said, these are smaller details and they can be a little bit difficult to refine because you don't really have much room to maneuver. I'm not really used to drawing very small drawings or very large drawings. Most of my drawings are what I would refer to as medium-sized drawings, I suppose. Or at least that's the case when I'm working in charcoal, because some other types of pencils like graphite pencils or colored pencils, they give you a little bit more precision. With charcoal, I usually tend to do slightly larger drawings, focusing on larger relationships between areas of lighter and darker value. But when you have good charcoal pencils that can be sharpened pretty well, you can draw some finer details as well. And speaking of those finer details, I'm starting to work on these hairs on the texture of the fur, which I'm going to draw by pulling many of these short marks. And when drawing fur, you need to pay attention to the length of the fur and the direction of the fur. So you want to pull your strokes so that they match the length and the direction of the fur. And because the fur appears a little bit longer here on the neck, my strokes are going to be just a little bit longer than they were on the head area. After I've done that, after I've laid down that texture, I'm doing some blending with a brush. And the good thing about brushes as blending tools is that they don't destroy all of the texture, they just soften it a little bit, which makes the fur coat look more dense and softer and fluffier, which is what I want. But it also makes it a bit darker in the process, so that's something you need to keep in mind. You have to plan for it in advance. And you sometimes also have to remove a little bit of value, but I can always do that later with my erasers. Now in some other parts of the body, like for example on the legs here, because I'm working on the front legs here, the fur is considerably shorter, so I can't really pull these short strokes to imitate the look of short fur because it's really small. What I do instead is I drag my pencil and I try to create a texture that kind of looks like short fur. And if I want, I can soften that a little bit with my blending tools, or I can go back and add a bit of texture and a few more of those longer strokes where needed, because the length of the fur varies depending on the part of the wolf's body or any furry animal's body. And that's something you need to keep in mind, because in addition to those larger shadows, you also need to try to make sure that your fur looks realistic, and in order to do that you have to pay attention to the length and the direction of the fur. Once all of that is done, I can always go back in with a charcoal pencil and do a little bit of refining, add some more of those shadow areas in between the thicker clumps of fur, or maybe take away a little bit of value using erasers. Right now I'm doing more drawing here on the back and the side of the body, where I first put in those darker areas using a soft charcoal pencil, and now I'm making a sort of a transition from those darkest portions of the fur at the top of the back towards the lighter fur around the belly. And I put both of the legs opposite of us, added a little bit more shadow to them so that the legs which are closer to us and the rest of the body would stand out a little bit better. Now, in addition to this texture of the fur which I just drew, I can also add some even darker marks to indicate that there are some folds in the fur here, because these folds in the fur will form around those places where the fur is thicker and longer, and they will follow the shape of the animal's body, the anatomy of the animal's body, and the folds in the skin. So wherever the animal's body tends to bend, you will see more of these folds in the fur. And also where the fur is longer, you will have these darker, deeper shadows, because they exist in between those longer or larger clumps of fur. So I put those in, and now I'm softening them with tortillon to integrate them better into the rest of the fur. and also adding some marks around them just to make a more gradual transition, because I felt that some of those darker marks stood out a little bit too much against the rest of the lighter fur. Of course, I'm going to need to do a bit of refining with erasers, and first I'm going to do a little bit of work with a kneaded eraser. Now, the good thing about kneaded erasers is that you can change their shape, and if you need to erase a larger area, you can do that. If you want to erase finer marks, you can reshape your kneaded eraser to form a teardrop shape or a blade-like shape, so you can remove very fine, small marks, and that helps a lot when drawing fur or when drawing these lighter clumps of fur. Now, in addition to the kneaded eraser, which basically lifts up the charcoal, you can also try to work with a pencil eraser or a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Both of these have their advantages because pencil erasers and Tombow Mono Zero eraser are very convenient because you can hold them like a pencil. Here at the bottom, under the feet, I added a bit of shadow, a bit of ground. I'm not going to do too much with it because I don't plan to draw all of the background. This is a vignette, so I'm just going to make some suggestions of some terrain there and a little bit of shadow under the animal, and maybe a few blades of grass here and there, just to make that part of the background a little bit more interesting, and just so that I have at least a little bit of the background. Anyway, I'm back to working on the wolf, and I'm moving on to this tail and the backside area. The tail is covered with longer fur, so I'm pulling longer curved strokes here, and it also has some darker fur as well, especially around the tip or the end of the tail, which is why I'm going to use more of the softer charcoal pencil there. But first I'm covering these thighs and the hip area using the same approach, laying down that texture, making those short marks following the direction and the length of the fur. On the tail I used a bit more of the soft charcoal pencil, like I said, to make that tip a bit darker, and I'm gonna blend that in to make a nice transition from the lighter parts of the fur towards the darker parts of the fur. So I'm doing a bit more blending here on the legs, on the hip area, softening everything with a brush. And I know that during some parts of this process it looks a little bit ugly and messy, but I can always refine that. As I'm doing now, I'm using a Tombow Mono Zero eraser and just pulling some lighter strokes, lighter marks, where the fur is a little bit lighter. I want to make the viewer feel like they're looking at actual fur, and that's why texture is so important for me. Of course, what's even more important than texture is larger relationships between lighter and darker areas, and I think this top part of the darker fur makes for a nice contrast against the lighter fur around the belly and the legs. So I'm taking away a bit of value around the legs and softening some of the fur using a tortilla. And here on the tail I'm going to do a little bit of erasing and a bit of cleaning up around the shape of the legs, because I didn't really have a clean edge in some places where I needed to have it, because it's important to have a clean edge around the shape of your main subject so that it would stand out against the background. So I'm making the tail a bit softer and lighter, and just doing a bit of refining on other parts of the body as well, adding some details to the legs, and also changing the shape of the head and the entire body, adding some final touches here and there. One of the things that I also like to do is I like to drag my pencil to produce some random texture, just to make the the appearance of that fur coat a little bit more interesting, especially in those areas where the hair is a bit shorter, just to have a bit more texture. But these are just some finishing touches, and now, as you can see, the drawing is done. I'm just going to lift up a little bit of charcoal here around the ear and modify the shape of the ear ever so slightly, as well as this tear duct and the fur under the eye. So I'm almost done. I'm just going to put my signature in the lower left corner. And I would also like to remind you to check out my other videos and to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you want to see more content and longer videos, then you should check out my Patreon. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I want to thank you for watching. I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.